I got to tell you, one of the greatest joys I have in my role here at CCU is the opportunity to bring scholars like Paul Larkin from Washington, D.C. to be able to come out here and interact with us. That was just fantastic. And Paul, we agree with you. And thank you for your leadership at the Heritage Foundation. Keep going, my friend. Next, we're going to hear from Luke Niforatos. Luke is a friend who actually came to one of these symposiums 5 years ago and then met the leader of Smart Approaches to Marijuana and now serves as the executive vice president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. So not only are you going to hear great things while you're here, you're going to get a chance to interact with people, and I hope there's friendships and partnerships that build while you're here. Luke also serves as the Centennial Institute's fellow in health and drug policy, is the principal deputy to the CEO in his role at Smart Approaches to Marijuana as the executive vice president. He presides over strategic federal, state, and educational initiatives, serves as the spokesperson for SAM. You may have seen him on Fox News and programs like that, and manages the organization's operations. His work has been profiled by media outlets such as Fox, as well as the Denver Gazette, Colorado Politics, Colorado Springs Gazette. He has been featured at events held by The Economist, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and in dozens of events and town halls across the United States on the subject of drug policy. Luke's work has appeared in almost every major national media outlet, and his op-eds are regularly published across the U.S. Prior to joining SAM, he was the co-founder of a healthcare company. Luke attended the University of Denver and has a Master's of Arts from Johns Hopkins University, and lives in Denver with his Lone Tree now, with his wife and two daughters still? Two daughters. Great. Please welcome our good friend of the Centennial Institute, Luke Niforatos.
So is this clicker? Oh, perfect. Awesome. All right. You all are on it. Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here speaking with all of you. I was telling Paul, who I've had the great privilege of knowing for over 5 years now, it's nice to have him on my turf in Colorado, not have to be on his turf in DC. But I do want to, before I say anything else, just thank two people who have been really steadfast. And one of those is Paul Larkin. Paul has been a really steadfast, faithful person to this movement for the last 5 years, particularly an expert on drug-impaired driving. He has consistently been researching, working, putting out work that is so edifying to our field, and really, I think, saving lives, Paul. And your commitment to doing what's right, your commitment to your values has made an impact on me personally during our 5-year friendship. So I want to thank you for that, and thank you for coming to Colorado. I'll never forget our first little thing in Congress we did. We had a panel with AAA and you and myself and others, and so we've been doing a lot of work for a lot of years together. And the second person I want to thank is Jeff Hunt, who has also been a faithful and steadfast friend over these last 5 years, continually boldly speaking up on this issue in a state where, and I'll admit, when I came to that symposium at CCU 5 years ago, I thought I was the only person who thought marijuana was kind of not going that great in our state. And I left that symposium very emboldened. But I've watched Jeff Hunt continue to be willing to speak the truth and continue to grow the impact of the Centennial Institute and CCU nationally. And I'll tell you, I lived in DC for 2 years. I've spent a lot of time in DC. I'm there just about a week or so out of every month. And I see more and more CCU license plates and bumper stickers for the staffers that are going into Congress, and it makes me very happy, very excited because of the impact this school is having. So bravo, Jeff Hunt, and to CCU as well. Thank you for that great work. I'm excited to talk to you today. My job, I work on marijuana, but we've seen a expansion over the last 2 years to looking at legalizing other drugs. And so I'm spending more time now talking about should we have injection sites? Should we have psychedelics legalized? Should we have safe supply? How many of you have heard of safe supply? Safe supply. So the tainted supply where people are getting drugs and it could have fentanyl in it. So the real solution is for taxpayers to fund pure heroin and pure fentanyl for addicts to have, because at least we'll know what's in it. As if you can safely use any sort of drugs, folks. It's really crazy. And so, that's a lot of what I'm spending time talking about. I'll spare you some of the crazy stuff unless you want to ask questions about it afterward. But right now here in our state, we're looking at psychedelics. And I want to walk us through a little journey of where we're at with marijuana, and then we're going to go into psychedelics, and you're going to probably see a lot of parallels, at least I hope you will. And what I'll say off the bat is I was doing a debate in front of our Colorado counties just 2 weeks ago. And the pro side that wants to legalize what's being called natural health medicine, or I like to just say medical psychedelics, just like medical marijuana, similar game plan. Hopefully we're all hearing, kind of seeing the parallels. One of the county commissioners said, well, what about when somebody uses these psychedelic drugs and drives? Do we have ways to measure impairment? Do we have ways to test for that? And the response from the guy who heads up this committee to legalize psychedelics in our state was, I quote, "I would be very surprised if that were to happen." And all the county commissioners said, I would not be. And so Paul, asked a great common sense question. What about impairment on the roads? And that's just one of the many questions we should be asking about the legalization of psychedelics. Because we still don't have a roadside test for marijuana impairment, and we still don't have a per se limit like 0.08 for alcohol for marijuana impairment. So we haven't figured it out with our currently legal Schedule I drug. And now we're proposing to legalize more Schedule I drugs. And I think we need to be careful about that. So I want to jump in just a little bit about my organization, what we do. SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit organization based in DC. We are the nation's leading organization fighting against the legalization of marijuana. Now we're starting to look at other drugs. We formed another organization called the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions, where we're addressing issues like psychedelics, et cetera. And we educate folks. We work on regulations in Colorado. So we were with the coalition that helped pass HB 1213, I think it was, or 17, looking at high potency marijuana here in our state last year. So we work on regulating the industry as well. We have a science advisory board that leads all of our work. We work with all kinds of different groups. I stood with the AMA just a few months ago at a press conference. All the major medical associations agree that what's going on with marijuana right now is deeply concerning. The science on commercialized drugs gives us a lot of concern and pause when we think about legalizing and commercializing any other drugs. So we work with all these different organizations. I'm going to skip through this. I want to highlight this dichotomy because it applies not only for marijuana, but for the drug policy discussion, okay? So right now in drug policy debates, and particularly with the marijuana debate, there's the point of either you totally legalize marijuana Colorado style, either you totally legalize drugs like we did with marijuana, or you throw everybody in prison for possession. And we call that a false dichotomy. Okay, in reality, there are 3 different buckets to this conversation. There's criminalizing users, and that's a whole other debate we have going on right now here in Colorado with fentanyl, as well as other drugs, because we defelonized all drugs in this state. Sent a message, I think, that it's no big deal if you're going to use any kind of drug. Our legislature is trying to, I think, hopefully rectify that. But that's one debate, is criminalization of possession. Second debate is the medical use, like what you heard Paul talking about earlier. Medical uses for marijuana, medical uses for psychedelics. And that is another part of this debate. And, I will say, and he talked about fraud, couldn't agree more. You have this situation where we have bypassed science, we've bypassed the FDA. And by the way, we've never voted on our medicines as a country before. Never. Never have we voted on our medicines. The FDA's always made that call for us. And before the FDA, we had the Tuskegee Institute, which is why we have the FDA, because companies shouldn't be experimenting with their drugs on the vulnerable populations of this country. Their health be darned. That's why we have the FDA, folks, to protect folks, okay? But that is a second bucket of the conversation. And then you have the commercial sales and production. That's the third bucket, okay? And so I spelled these 3 things out because we're hearing that these things are medicine, so we should legalize and commercialize them. Well, that's 2 completely separate issues, right? We can address medicinal ideas separate from the idea of commercializing drugs. I hear we're throwing, we shouldn't throw people in jail if they're going to do magic mushrooms, okay? Maybe we shouldn't. Not very many people are in jail for magic mushrooms, by the way. They looked at the stats. I think it's less than 10 in this entire state. But for those who are, maybe they shouldn't be. Okay? But that is a conversation separate from the idea of creating an industry around magic mushrooms. Are we understanding the, how to separate these out? Good. So when it comes to marijuana, our Surgeon General under the Trump administration, Dr. Jerome Adams, is a friend of mine. He issued a historic advisory, first advisory in 40 years from the Surgeon General's office, saying marijuana is more dangerous, more potent than it's ever been, more addictive than it's ever been as a result of these commercialization policies. And pregnant mothers and youth are using it at unprecedented levels nationally. So this was the chief of his concerns. This was in 2019. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't heard about this already. And now, Biden's Surgeon General, our nation's top doctor currently, Dr. Vivek Murthy, shares his concerns. Policy has outpaced the science when it comes to marijuana. So our science, they've got a lot of research that's been done. Tens of thousands of research studies been done on this drug. Gives us concern, and yet policies are vastly outpacing that, right? And so we saw an industry leak. The industry's pitching a pitch deck to members of Congress, to federal agencies right now, asking to be considered just like tobacco, with a huge monopoly of a few small players that make all the money federally. That's what they want. This was the pitch deck. It was leaked to the press. Daily Beast, I encourage you to check it out. But they want, quote, a big weed oligopoly. It really concerns me when I think about the track record with tobacco. And why? Because Altria, the new name for Philip Morris and Marlboro, is invest over $2 billion into the marijuana industry. So tobacco is running this game. There's all these articles about it. Like it or not, big tobacco is invading cannabis. Fourth largest tobacco company in the world is invested in marijuana. And if you look at some of the documents that were turned up over the last several decades in the investigations in the tobacco industry, they've been planning this for a very long time. Marijuana's been on the tobacco roadmap. And so we bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and now they're trying to get federal recognition. Also have alcohol involved. You have Molson Coors, a lot of major alcohol companies. Altria is lobbying to legalize it in a lot of different states. If you want to check out the industries that are into marijuana right now, you can go to industry profiles on our website, learnaboutSAM.org. You will get all the various industries involved, including pharma. I'll tell you one particular pharma highlight in a second here. But also the federal officials and former federal officials who are invested in the numbers and what those details look like. But everybody hopefully sees Juul, and I think we all remember Juul. Would you be shocked to know that Juul started as a THC vaporizer company? It was spun off to handle the nicotine side of the business. PAX, explicitly a THC vaping company, continues to this day, doing all the things that Juul got banned for doing, using social media influencers, etc. It's really stunning. And here in Colorado, a few years ago, our legislature, bipartisan majority, so I'm not pointing the finger at any party, passed an explicit exemption to the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act for the marijuana industry. So hotels, restaurants, and lounges here in Colorado may elect to have joint smoker sections. But you know what they can't do? They can't have cigarette smoking sections. So we are in the twilight zone of public health regulations here in Colorado. It's not just us, it's in Illinois too. But look at the bill. It's an exemption to the Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act, is what it's called. So I mentioned a pharma highlight. The guy who wrote the OxyContin playbook for Purdue Pharma, their CEO, John Stewart, he is into the marijuana industry now too. So it's all the same kind of addiction for profit players. Privateer Holdings, the first marijuana hedge fund. This is not a stock photo. These are the guys. This is the movement for marijuana legalization. I think people thought it was social justice. I think people had this idea of hippies back in the day. None of that has been the case. It's these guys who are putting lots and lots of money into it. So joints are no more. I feel like I have to stop saying this at some point because I've said this thousands of times, like the old weed, the new weed. But we did a poll in Colorado, and only 30% of Coloradans even knew what was being sold in dispensaries today. It's been 9 years. So we assume people know what's being sold. This is what's being sold. Not this, but this. And nobody knows. And we live in our communities. These are being sold legally. These are legal, regulated products. And by the way, here in Colorado and every other state that's legalized marijuana, the law says no targeting youth, no child-friendly packaging. So how do these get approved in these state regulatory processes? Well, because the industry is following the tobacco playbook. They have the best lawyers, the best lobbyists. Here in Colorado, they're the #3 lobbying presence in our state capital. The marijuana industry is. They know how to look at a law and read the words and imply that they mean something else, when we all know what they mean. So when you have a big industry and you allow it to commercialize around a drug, you have problems because they can dance around the regulations. Okay, so these are different products that we see out there. But you heard about the shatters and the waxes. We're up to 99% potency. From just 2 decades ago, it was 1 to 3% potency. So you hear about marijuana, you think it's this old kind of, the weed of yesteryears. Not that anymore. It's not organic. It's not a plant. It's being made in chemical labs. It's being genetically modified. This is a totally different drug now. Totally different impact. Okay, and it's not surprising because if we look at the tobacco example, tobacco has been used for thousands of years across our world. Millions of people were not dying from lung cancer over the last several thousand years. That only happened about 100 years ago. Why? The invention of the cigarette, the advent of a commercial global tobacco industry, the addition of additives, the changing of the tobacco plant, the inclusion of nicotine. When you are a for-profit company, your goal, your legal incentive is to enrich your shareholders, sell as much of your products as you can. That is your legal job. Great when you're like me and you had a digital health company and it helped see more patients. Great when you're Apple and you're selling iPhones and computers that are useful. Horrible when it's a drug that is addictive and harmful, because your legal incentive as a company, folks, is not to, oh, you're using a lot of that, you should maybe stop. No. Here's the easiest way, and now in Colorado we have delivery, online orders, all kinds of ways to easily get your drug. It is your job as a for-profit company to make it easy. That's the beauty of capitalism, as Jeff said, the beauty of it, but also the horrible dark side, and why we cannot have unbridled capitalism around our drugs. So this is what happens. You get these waxes, these shatters. My former neighbor, Laura Stack, her son, Johnny Stack, perfect SAT score, no history of mental illness in his family, multiple generations back, solid Christian kid, great background, 16 years old, legally gets a medical marijuana card, starts consuming these high-potency dabs, the shatters that you see there, goes psychotic, jumps off of a parking garage, the Lincoln RTD stop parking garage, just about a mile from where I live, to his death 2 years ago. Laura Stack goes and spreads the word now with Johnny's ambassadors across our state and across the country. Okay, but this drug is totally different. It is totally different than what you know from yesteryears. And these products, by the way, they're not the extreme. They're now becoming the majority of the market. Over 15% of the market nationally is these 97% THC levels. 10 to 15% THC, folks, less than 2% of the market. So for those of you in business, if you're going to get into the marijuana business, you know where the money is. That's where the market is the high potency products. So what does that mean? What's the difference with these high potency products? Well, 1 in 3 people who uses marijuana in the last year now will develop a cannabis use disorder. That is addiction. The myth that marijuana is not addictive is completely false. Cannabis use disorder is the scientific diagnosis code you will receive from your doctor if you are diagnosed with marijuana addiction. And this number, folks, a decade ago was 1 in 10. So it is a totally different drug. It's changed when it was commercialized. It's more addictive now than ever before. And by the way, 1 in 3 of everyone, not youth, not just youth, not, kids shouldn't use it, adults, it's okay. Adults and kids, 1 in 3 who are going to use this, okay? And we have some formatting issues here, but 5 times your likelihood with the new high-potency marijuana, according to one of the largest studies ever done on marijuana in the Lancet Journal of Psychiatry, you have a 5-fold increase in your likelihood of schizophrenia or psychosis when you're using this high-potency marijuana. So the Mental Health Association is dramatic right now, and we're seeing this again in studies that just came out 2 months ago, again from the Lancet. More likely to experience addiction, more likely actually to use other illicit drugs. Very interesting, the associations we're seeing with this new high-potency product. And so you look at the monthly use on the left, the annual use on the right, red bars, legal states, purple bars, non-legal states. Okay, it's no comparison. Our youth and our young adults are using marijuana at much higher rates in our legal states than in our non-legal states. Because what we legalize and allow to be promoted, right? When you legalize and commercialize, you create an industry. That industry promotes their products. They become more available, more prevalent. That message gets to our kids whether we like it or not. So of course we're going to see these numbers play out. And we've seen this is probably one of the biggest studies I've seen yet on this. 25% increase in marijuana addiction among our youth in every state that has legalized marijuana. Every single one. 25% increase in youth addiction. So we've got to be looking out for our families, right? So I talked about how the industry hires the best and brightest. Somebody sent me this from Oregon the other day. The industry figured out that in the definitions section of the legalization bill in Oregon and California, pre-K and kindergartens weren't technically defined as schools. So there's a dispensary that's being proposed to be set up right by this pre-K, this kindergarten. So why would an industry that wants to be regulated, wants to be safe, doesn't want to target kids, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Well, we've seen this before. It's big tobacco all over again, okay? And of course, we have this pot shop in Manitou Springs. I just think this picture is so poignant. You have a mom with her toddler and her kid in a baby stroller hanging out in line to get weed at a pot shop. We don't think that sends a message to our kids that this is normal. This is okay. Even medicinal, even helpful. So we look at the kind of industry average here, okay? Alcohol, 10% of the users of alcohol make up 75% of the industry's profits. Average user in that cohort drinks 10 drinks of alcohol a day. Okay, so 75% of all the money the alcohol industry is making is off of 10% of the people that are using it. Heavy, addicted users of alcohol. My point here is not, oh, it's horrible, these horrible alcohol conglomerates, they just want to kill everybody and get you addicted. I don't think that's what they want. But they run a for-profit company. Their incentive is to make their product as easily accessible as possible and to sell as much of it as they can. And if it's a small number of people who are doing most of the consumption, so be it. They're not nonprofits. They're not doctors. So look at the comparison with marijuana, folks. Same exact thing is playing out. This industry is making most of its money off the heaviest users of marijuana. This is from the Colorado Department of Revenue. So we know it's happening. We know that the addicted users are driving the profits for this industry. Do you think they want to stop that? They want to cut into their profits? They can't. They're legally defined to make profit. And so our shops are recommending pot to pregnant mothers. Jeff did a great job getting bibs on every pot shop in Denver, saying, please don't hurt our future, sign Colorado kids, because these shops were pushing marijuana to pregnant mothers in their first trimester, saying it helps with nausea. Even though the research tells us you can't do that. That is harmful to the child in the womb. Even some have died. And so we're seeing hospitalizations go up in Alaska, Colorado, elsewhere. Massachusetts, Colorado, Washington, huge increases in poison control center calls as well. And so, we heard about driving a little bit from Paul, and he's got a lot of great research on this, even more than what I have. But the research is telling us that it's doubling. The number of people dying on the roads from marijuana-impaired drivers has doubled in Colorado, Washington, other states. And 50% of everybody tested for THC on the roads in Oregon tested positive. Okay. 50%. It's a lot of impairment on the roads. And of course, we didn't get rid of our drug dealers. It's really interesting. We're hearing a lot about crime right now in the election cycle. Okay, everyone wants to talk about crime. And we had a great study that came out from the Common Sense Institute here in Colorado talking about the increases in crime over the last decade. Hang on a second. Since when? 2012? Hey, Jeff, what did we vote on in 2012?
Pot candy.
Yeah, pot candy. So we're hearing about an unprecedented drug addiction epidemic across our state. And we voted to legalize marijuana and commercialize it in 2012. And we're looking at the numbers from 2012 to today, and we have some of the largest increases in crime, property crime, violent crime, mental health issues, addiction. All those things are through the roof in our state. And we don't think that we have some culpability with the policy decisions that we made as a state? That something's not contributing to this? I don't think marijuana is exclusively to blame for our crime crisis, but if you ask members of law enforcement, like I'm going to when I have 2 more members up on stage with me in a couple of hours, they will tell you the number one factor involved in the crimes they're dealing with is drugs. So drugs is clearly to play with our crime crisis. We can't divorce those two things. If we want our politicians to solve the problems with crime, we need a holistic approach that addresses drugs and addresses crime, because those things are interlinked. Those things are interlinked. And so we see the black markets raging. California, this is California Governor Gavin Newsom who said this. Black market's getting worse, not better, since legalization. He called the National Guard to help him fight with the massive cartel pot grows, illegal grows, all across his state. California Governor Gavin Newsom, I will take that quote from him any day. Oregon, 30% is legal in their state. So 70% of all marijuana sold and consumed in Oregon, where it's legal, is done on the black market. So the drug dealers have never been better. They're beating the legal market. Tax revenue, hopefully you're not all super surprised to see this. We didn't get a gold textbook in every desk for our students here in Colorado. It didn't happen. The chicken in every pot, Hoover, that promise worked out so well. They were doing that again with marijuana, and again, they have failed to deliver. It is a fraction of a percent of our state budgeted revenues. Every legal state is making less than 1% when it comes to tax revenues. So we're not making money on this. In fact, most of the cities, towns, and counties have opted out, including here in Colorado. Look at California. Does that surprise you at all? 80% of California opting out of marijuana. Don't want the shops there. Well, we talked about the false dichotomy, right? People may have voted to legalize marijuana. That didn't mean that they wanted an industry. A lot of folks thought it was medicinal. A lot of folks thought, I have a friend who uses it. I don't want him to go to jail. That didn't mean that they wanted shops in their neighborhoods selling gummy bears. And that's exactly what they got, and they opted out. California is just a great example. Okay, so let's jump into psychedelics. So I've given you kind of how this is working, okay, the players, the for-profit industries that are invested in legalizing marijuana. And so it's kind of like, I'm a dad of 2 little girls. My daughter Shiloh's turning 6 in a couple of weeks, and my daughter Eden is 1.5. They're keeping me on my toes, and my lovely wife too. And I was thinking on my drive over here, how can I kind of tell this story? And for whatever reason, it's just because I'm a dad, I was thinking, it's a tale as old as time, a song as old as rhyme, okay? Marijuana and psychedelics. Industries, but I know, this is recorded too, this is so bad, this is gonna get out. I have a feeling Jeff's gonna use this one against me, but I was thinking about this. Same old story, folks. So the same funder New Approach PAC, massive PAC with millions and millions of dollars. They have spent money to legalize marijuana across the country for the last decade. Millions of dollars to do that. They were the ones that backed legalizing all drugs, decriminalizing all drugs in Oregon. They are the ones backing this measure. They've given $3 million. Who's one of their biggest people that's given? We don't know all the people that's given a New Approach PAC, but Dr. Bronner's Soaps. So Dr. Bronner's Soaps has apparently a expert medical and FDA staff that's really interested in medicine and wants to have medical psychedelics legalized in Colorado. Like, what? I think there's some profit interests involved here. I don't know about you. So, we're seeing companies fund this. This entire initiative in Colorado is funded from out of state, entire thing. New Approach PAC is a DC-based PAC. Dr. Bronner Soaps is the biggest investor in them right now. They're not based in Colorado, for the record. So that is who's bankrolling this measure here in Colorado. It's called the Natural Health Medicine Act, Proposition 122. And what they're proposing to do is, let me just, before I say that. So you see this thing down here. Companies are looking to get into psychedelics game right now. They're calling it the fledgling psychedelics industry. They're already calling it the psychedelics industry, and it hasn't been legalized yet. So entrepreneurs are jumping into the space. We're seeing huge stories in Bloomberg and other articles on studies that have been done on psychedelics and their potential. And I think we've probably all heard a little bit about that, maybe PTSD, et cetera. A lot of these studies, now Paul mentioned one that was done by JAMA. That's a good one. A lot of these studies that we're hearing about, though, in the news have been funded by the companies that are building the products. Because that is the game plan, folks. Big Tobacco funded their own studies. That's the whole, when you have a drug and you're a company, the idea is you start using your product and you get people to use it, and then you do a study yourself that you fund yourself. Not unbiased at all, not objective, certainly not scientific. So we should be concerned when we see psychedelic gold rush in the headlines, and then we get a initiative that says, let's bring psychedelic natural medicines to Colorado. Oh, but it actually commercializes these drugs. So actually, before I go into this any further, so the initiative creates a commercial market for psychedelics. Companies will be allowed to produce, sell, and promote psychedelics under this initiative. So how is that any different from the strategy with medical marijuana? It's not. Would you be surprised to know that the same consulting firm that worked on legalizing marijuana is the same consulting firm that is working this initiative to legalize it? And that's got the same funders? Okay. And what they're doing is, it's not just magic mushrooms. A lot of you are going to hear about magic mushrooms. There's actually 5 other drugs that are going to be legal under this initiative by the year 2026, if this passes, for medicinal use. And so what they're saying is it's particular medical benefit is for things like PTSD, but psychiatric symptoms. It's called for mental health disorders. That's what they're saying it's for, okay? And so just, knowing that going in, okay, so this was an interesting research study that found most people, large portion of people, who use psychedelics said it was one of the worst trips of their lives, didn't want to go back and use it again, okay? These drugs, by the way, are not heavily used across our state and not heavily used nationally either. So most people don't use these psychedelic drugs. There's kind of a niche cottage kind of group of people that are into that. But when you create an industry around it, that industry's incentive is going to be to get more people to try it, to get more people to use it. Obviously, they don't want to just serve a very small base and keep it that way. They want to expand and grow. So we don't really know what these drugs look like at population scale if more and more people start using them on a regular basis. We really don't know what that will look like. That's something we really need to understand better. But what I do know is what the American Psychiatric Association says. They issued this statement in July. We should all heed this and apply it when we vote at the ballot November 8th. There is no scientific evidence right now. This is the nation's foremost association of doctors and scientists on psychiatric disorders. No scientific evidence for psychedelics to treat these disorders right now. None. We've seen promising studies. The FDA has fast-tracked clinical trials on psilocybin and some of these other drugs. Great. Let it go through that scientific process. Let's get it through clinical trials. But what we are proposing to do here in Colorado, folks, is say, forget what the APA thinks. We're going to trust Dr. Bronner's Soaps and the wise and scientific entrepreneurial minds of the psychedelic gold rush with medicines for people with mental health disorders. What could go wrong? And the FDA has fast-tracked these clinical trials, so we know that we'll likely have approved medications we'll get prescriptions for with dosages and from our doctors legally. So what they're asking us to do is say, that takes too long. We shouldn't have all these safety mechanisms in effect. Let's vote at the ballot for our state and just unleash these medications in their raw form, these drugs in their raw form across the state and hope it works out. That's not how you take care of patients, folks. And as far as our veterans and their PTSD goes, I don't know about you, but I'm getting really sick of folks using our veterans to sell their latest addiction for profit scheme. Our veterans need every bit of help they can get, and if these drugs end up being helpful for them, great. I am not going to unleash untested, unclinically trialed, unvalidated, unscientifically led drugs on our veterans with PTSD and tell them, here, take this. This is how we're going to take care of you, and let's line the pockets of Wall Street investors who want to make money off of drugs. Our veterans deserve better than that. We owe them better than that. And we shouldn't buy in to another advertising campaign. I don't know about you, but I remember the ads in 2012 with the veterans saying, marijuana helps me with my PTSD. By the way, step back for a second. Okay, so we need psychedelics to help people with PTSD. Wait a second, I thought marijuana was helping us with our PTSD. There's a lawmaker in California who said we need to legalize psychedelics to help people get off opioids. Wait a second, I thought marijuana helped us get off of opioids. And so then somebody said, it was hilarious. I was tweeting at him and somebody said, well, marijuana was the therapeutic need, but now you need psychedelics to sustain it. Oh, okay. I have a feeling I'll be hearing that one again with another set of drugs. So what are these psychedelics? You know, a lot of them are found in plants and fungi. These are some of the different drugs that we're seeing. LSD is not going to be legalized under this measure. It's psilocybin, mescaline, MDMA. Those are the different ones that will be legalized. Not all these drugs are what are going to be legalized on the initiative, but this is what's classically referred to for psychedelics. Okay, FDA so far has said that these drugs have high abuse potential. They are not going to be helpful for really anything, but we're seeing now some studies that suggest maybe there's some medical benefit. So lots of effects, okay, but I want you to really walk away with this effect because this really concerns me. Persisting hallucinogenic disorder, okay? What that means is you could be a user of these drugs, psilocybin, for example, and you get the hallucinogenic effects when you're high on it. High goes away. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, several months later, you could experience those hallucinogenic effects again, randomly, completely sober. So this is a disorder we're still beginning to understand, but it happens. So my concern is school bus driver who tried it a few months ago and all of a sudden has an onset of these hallucinations while driving the school bus. These are things we don't understand and very concerning if they become a bigger issue at population scale. And we've seen multiple research studies that have found this disorder. Second thing, we talked about psychosis with marijuana. Same issue at play here with these drugs, persistent psychosis. That is associated with the regular use of these psychedelic drugs. They're far from harmless. You don't just trip out and then go back to your normal life. There's a segment of the population we're still understanding that when they use these drugs, they get persistent psychosis. That's something we need to be aware of as well. These are not just harmless. So right now, you have surveys nationally. I just thought it was interesting. Most Americans don't want to legalize these things right now. We'll see how that continues as industries advertise and promote these products and play them off as harmless, like we saw with marijuana. But I thought it was really interesting, this quote from one of the leaders of the psychedelics movement, who said, what do these things do to the human brain? The answer is, we just don't know. But Colorado, you should make them medicine and give them to people with severe psychiatric disorders. I'll leave you with that. We have some resources, etc., but this is our website. I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank Jeff, the Centennial Institute, CCU, Heritage. Thank you all so very much. God bless you all.
All right, we are just trucking along in our day. We're going to take a 10-minute break now.